lesson number 6, we are looking at what? Playing God.
Changing his times.
Playing God. I want you to think about that. Playing God. I mean, didn't that heading catch you?
Yeah.
Playing God. I can't help but think of the words that we were taken to, which is the chapter 14, verse 12. Now, the reason why I don't follow the lesson study chronologically, because you should study that at home. And it's quite interesting that we're jumping through a lot of history, kingdoms that came and went. It's actually quite, when you think that in a matter of, say, 5 chapters or 6 chapters, we flew through generations of time. But there is a common thread that is found from the experience of Assyria right through Babylon, etc. There is a common thread. And what is that common thread? Verse 12 of Isaiah chapter 14. How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. Now, the author did something brilliantly. He linked it to Ezekiel, a chapter there where we know that it's talking about kingdoms. And what I was quite intrigued by is, why do you think, and this is just to get us our dialogue going, why do you think when we look at this morning star, son of the dawn, you have been cast down to earth, you who once laid low the nations? You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly. There's words coming out of there, phrases coming out of there that you must understand. Although we're talking about kingdoms on planet Earth, it is still the great controversy. Do you understand what I mean by that? Revelation chapter 12 says there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. That has not stopped. Even though we find ourselves in a world that seems to be ruled by Lucifer, no, there is a war going on. And God isn't passively sitting behind the scenes hoping that something will happen. I love the way in which, when you look at Isaiah 13 and you read of the words used there, it's words of action. It's not words that are passive. When you think of us, I want you to look at it with me, starting with Isaiah chapter 13, verse 6. And you'll see I'm working with you as I go on, because I want you to be aware, dear friends, that this lesson study will mean nothing if we disassociate ourselves from it. If we are only going to be looking at it from an objective view, we're going to miss the point. Subjectively, how does this touch you? And when I think of kingdoms, why kingdoms? Why do we have this emphasis of one king wanting to take over another king, and there was kingdoms fighting against kingdoms? I mean, that's what Matthew 24 tells us. Nation will fight against nation. Why? What is being revealed as we actually look around us? What is being revealed? That there is a war going on. And you might not see the different people involved, but there's somebody involved. One person once said to me, when we were talking about the coronavirus and the media, They said to me, Billy, you know black ants and red ants? And I said, yes. He said, they never fight with one another. So I said, well, what do you mean? He says, if you put them down and they will each do their thing and they will go their way and there will never be any fighting. But take them and put them in a bottle. Even then, they won't fight. But shake that bottle. Then you see what happens. Now I want you to understand something. Somebody's shaking the bottle. But nobody's looking at the bottle that's been shaken. They're looking at the ants. And how the ants are fighting. And we get the impression that it's one ant hating another ant. No, somebody shook the bottle. But nobody talks about who shook the bottle. And this whole lesson study is actually telling us that somebody is shaking the bottle. But we, because we can't see them, think it's the person closest to me. Have you ever done it? And I do it often. You walk up to a person and you're standing behind them and you tap them on their shoulder on this side. And they automatically turn that way and then you're standing on this side. Don't you do that? You're not mischief like me? When you do things to distract people, I don't know if you know what a ventriloquist is, but it's a person who can throw his voice. Now, Jeff Dunham, I don't know if any of you know him, he's an incredible ventriloquist. I'm telling you. You look at him carefully, you can't see him speaking. He speaks in different tones, different things. And sometimes he says something and it sounds like it's coming from a box. And the way that he diverts your attention to that is that you tend to think the noise is coming from there, but he's speaking. And I want you to be aware that what I'm trying to show you is that there's a lot of crying out going on, but we're not seeing who's really crying out. And the lesson study says, playing God. Can any of you explain that to me? What's it mean to play God? How do I play God?
Controlling the earth.
Okay, you say controlling the earth, but that, you made it now like God up in heaven controlling the earth. I want you to look at it for yourselves. Can you ever play God?
Creating a disease.
Pardon?
Creating a disease.
Now you're talking again, you want to get into conspiracy. We don't talk about conspiracy. I want you to think, forget about everything else. Think of yourself. Pardon? Judging. Do you find yourself sometimes wondering if you should really give attention to that or give your time to that, somebody else's problem? I want you to understand something. We all have, yes? Do you want to say something? Say it.
It's taking the role that you have control over somebody else's.
Listen to that word. She just used the word I was looking for. It's control. You want to control your environment. In your home, can I just come in there and put my feet up on your chairs? Can I just come in there and turn on the TV? Can I come in there and open up your fridge and just eat your food? Or will there be war? Do you understand what I'm asking? We each have a little kingdom. Now, there's a reason why I'm touching on the concept of kingdoms, because we're looking at that. We actually studied a whole lot of kings, and some of them behave badly, and some of them behave, well, they end up behaving quite good. But why kingdoms? You see, why will it be really touching you if you didn't have a kingdom? And why this thing about kingdoms? It's almost like I want to rule myself. Part of wearing a mask and not wearing a mask is, I'm not going to be told by somebody else to do something. I rule my own kingdom. And without you knowing it, you are actually setting up a standard. You're looking at, why are we talking about kingdoms? You know, the devil comes along and he says, don't worry, each one of you is practicing where you have the right to act and do as you want to. And then we get shocked when we see that children aren't called she or he anymore, they are its. It's like you said to your child, although you are a he, I'm sorry, but it, come over here. Without you knowing it, you're influencing that person's life in such a way that you're affecting their kingdom. How are they going to grow up? And why do we play around with this? Why do we talk about kings? Why? And speak. You're allowed to talk. Yes.
On earth, around the kingdom's authority, and we want to challenge that authority.
Okay, you use the word authority. I like that. Okay, so you're starting to use words. You use control. He's used the word authority. These are things that, I mean, ladies, let me stir this. Ephesians says you must subject yourselves to your husbands. You like that, eh?
It's rebellion in us, which is stirred by the deception that we do not need to obey or worship or be under anything's control.
You see, the interesting thing, what I read here is even if you do have a kingdom, there is a kingdom above you, stronger than you. And you've got to decide who you're going to ally yourself with. Really, that is what it's all about. Birds of a feather flock together. We look for reason. Now, there's a reason why I'm bringing this out. Why does Lucifer, I'm starting off with him, want to lift himself up to be like the Most High?
Jealousy.
What's his viewpoint? Because the heading was playing God. What's his viewpoint regarding God?
Jealousy.
Ultimate power.
That he is a king, and the word actually refers to him as the King of Kings. Does God not recognize kings? No, he recognized kings. He gave you a kingdom. He gave your life, your family, in its essence, is a kingdom. But dear friends, we need to recognize, even though we are in control of our kingdoms, we are still subject to somebody else. But you have to choose who you're going to be subject to. That's the difference. Now the devil says, no way, you don't have to be subject to anybody else. But by doing what he's asking you to do, you have automatically subjected yourself to his thinking.
And that's where the free will deception comes.
Exactly. I mean, dear friends, do you know that laws, in God's word, laws are referred to as boundaries or walls? You've heard of the story of the man who built a tower and he had a vineyard. What's the next thing he does? He builds a wall around it. Why does he build a wall around it? Because it belongs to him. Now, how do you identify the moment you've crossed into his territory? By climbing or going through the wall. What's the wall symbolize so many times, or typify in reality? Here we have walls. You walked through them. You came into this area. What did you do when you walked through those walls?
Entered.
You entered what?
Crossed into a place respected for God's purpose.
That's amazing. You said that you entered recognizing that you've entered into some place. When you go to Pick n Pay, you enter into a place where you go and do shopping. Or do you enter there expecting to go and do some workout in a gym? You know, one of the things that I had to learn very quickly when I was in when I had a health center, how do I separate myself from being a minister in a health center? You know, people would come and then we talk about Bible bashing, you know, we're using, you know, then we're going to use this to, you know, catch people, you know, they're going to come to the gym and we're going to start preaching to them, you know, do you know Jesus is coming? When that person walks through the door into a health center, what's he expecting you to talk to him about?
Trouble.
about health. When that person walks in there, they've come for the purpose maybe of losing weight or to get fit or to prepare for a particular sport or whatever. I never lost vision of that. Why do people have your homes? When I walk into your home, I've just entered through the walls. Now, the walls, to a great extent, even though we didn't see it, did something. It separated you immediately from what's going on outside. That's what walls do. And the most amazing thing is we're talking about walls here sometimes. What happened to the walls of Jericho? Can any of you tell me what happened? God broke down the walls of Jericho. What did he do by breaking down the walls? What actually happened to Jericho? It fell apart. When you take walls away, you've taken away the very infrastructure. Why do we put a burglar proofing by our windows? So that people don't just enter. And we don't realize that when we're starting to look at this, there is this dynamics. Lucifer, the devil, entered God's domain by breaking the laws and started to throw his toys around like, I'm in control, this is my place. But it was God's place. Now, do you think any person, any of you here, if somebody breaks into your home, if somebody, God forbid, and should walk in here with a gun, would we, oh, okay, you want, thank you, or will we stand up in defense? Depending, how valuable this stuff is, I can't help but think of Christ when he's accused of being a demonic possessed person. And he says, that's strange. Do you take the person's in charge and you fasten him to a chair and then you do? No, you don't do that. Well, they do that literally. They will come into your house, take control of you because they say, you're a threat. You're going to try and stop us from doing what we want to do. You see, when God's kingdom was a challenge, he didn't passively sit back. I want you to understand something. What I'm so excited about when I looked at this lesson study, not once did God stop defending his kingdom. Now let me ask you this. Is this world his? How do you know it's his? I need a reason. How do you know it's his? Paul, help me. How do you know it is? What? Who said it? Diane, what did you say? He created it.
And also the fruits. I mean, when there's order, there's abundance. When there's disorder, there's chaos and destruction.
It's quite correct. I mean, I had a farm where I had some mango trees. And you know what? I had an agreement with the monkeys. Baboons and monkeys. I had an agreement with them. I had a certain plantation that was just on a certain distance. I said, you can eat as much as you want of those, but you don't come and eat these. And they actually listened to me. Okay? The point that I'm trying to make here is, you see, God had established boundaries. You can eat from that tree, but you can't eat from that tree. But we, by stepping over and doing that, we actually broke a boundary. And that is what's happening here. One boundary has been taken over by another one. It's almost like Lucifer, the most amazing thing, is constrained to this world. He's not allowed to try and go and get any other kingdom. This is where he's allowed to play out, do what he wants to. And without seeing it, he's got one kingdom fighting against another kingdom. It's just this whole thing all going on. And I want you to understand, it's even in ourselves. In a married situation, a man is being independent, throwing his clothes down on the floor if he wants. His wife or girlfriend does what they want and everything's all right. And then one day they decide to join together and be in the same house. All of a sudden, I have a way of washing dishes and my wife has a way of washing dishes. Whose way is right? Do you understand what I'm getting at? Somebody has to step back and say, okay, that's your area. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? The devil didn't do that. When the devil was asked to step back, He didn't do that. He said, no ways. I want to be like the Most High. Now, what is the sad part about this story? Intelligent beings. Listen to the word that I'm using. Intelligent beings. He got a third of them to believe his lie. Now, are we surprised when we see intelligent people on planet Earth agreeing with sometimes things that shouldn't be there? So let's look at this. What I wanted you to notice is that there is this very distinct hidden message that's coming through here. And it started off with us seeing about this morning star. Now, can I ask you just to go back with me to that? Because remember, you must look at the lesson study. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12 says, well, maybe let's just jump back to verse 11. All your pomp has been brought down to the grave. What did I just tell you? All your pomp has just been brought down to the grave. What have I just said to you? I mean, it doesn't sound terrible, does it? What's just happened? Help me. Pardon? Yes, what's it mean? All your pomp has been brought down to the grave. What is pomp? Pomp is all about lifting yourself up, being puffed up, being, what's another word for it? Proud almost. Proud of your achievements, proud of what you look at. I love what the lesson study did right in the beginning, where a man was preaching on, what it means to be, let's just go and have a look at it. Go with me to that part. A minister, second paragraph, underneath the memory text, had preached a sermon on pride. A woman came to him afterwards and said, just this morning, listen to what she said. It says, third paragraph. She answered, the sin of pride. I had this problem because I sat for an hour before my mirror some days ago admiring my beauty. What answer did you expect from, before you read further, what answer would you have given that person who was sitting in front of the mirror looking at themselves and saying, whew, man. What answer would you have expected?
If you watch the man on the good side, you'll see he is not beautiful.
But what was he?
He told the truth.
What?
Friend.
Look at what he says.
I think that's your imagination.
Oh, responded the minister, that was not a sin of pride. That was a sin of imagination. Now listen to that. I love that. Something happened there that made me think, how many of us think we are really the bee's knees? And is it really true? You see, the most amazing thing is that God has a way, and I'm going to say this in a kind of strange way, but God has a way of chopping your legs off at your knees and calling you shorty. That's what's happening here. To each of these kingdoms that were puffing up, when you think of the story of Job, God confronts Job and says, hey, hang on. You've been talking about me saying all kinds of things. I want to talk to you now. And he started by saying, fasten your belt. I'm kind of wondering, why do you have to fasten your belt when God starts speaking to you? I mean, there's tremendous things coming out in the Word. Why does God ask you to fasten your belt when He's about to ask you some questions? What does a belt do? Keeps your pants up.
I was just going to say, there's an interesting passage in Corinthians where Paul talks about this. A fairly short verse saying to the effect that no flesh
No flesh glories in his presence. You see, I want you to understand something, dear friends. We put clothes on to hide our nakedness. But when God asks questions, he strips those clothes back. And it's the most amazing thing that this lady thought she was beautiful. But, okay, there wasn't a question asked here, but sometimes you need to be told something to open your eyes up. You know, the thing about, I'll give you a chance now, Gerald, the thing about eyesight, as you get older, it gets dimmer. And you don't see things so sharp anymore. And sometimes you start thinking you look beautiful when you look in the mirror. Praise God for bad eyesight. But then somebody comes along and says, wow, you haven't even combed your hair today yet. You understand what I'm saying? It's somebody telling you, Gerald?
Yeah, I want to say, we've been speaking of self-exaltation and all that type of thing. One of the big problems that Satan had, the main problem Satan had in the beginning, where we follow him, he started comparing himself. He was a bright one when he started. He started comparing himself with the other angels that were at a lower level than what he was, instead of comparing himself with God. If he compared himself with God, he would have seen what the word he is.
Well, it's true in some sense, Gerald, I agree with you, but he even decided to lift himself up to be equal with God.
That's what I'm saying.
He lost, first of all, he became so self-centered that he forgot who was truly a bright light. I mean, you know, how many of you ever watched these beauty pageants? Man, they walk around. Sometimes you think to yourself, that one's going to win. No, that one's going to win. No, definitely that one's going to win. And then the one that you thought wasn't going to win wins. And you kind of wonder, but what did they see in that person? One of the messages to the church is, you need ourselves so that you can see. So let's have a look at this. The whole objective of this lesson study is not to talk and say, yeah, look at what they did and all that. Is to find out, are we perhaps right there? And is this message addressing us? Let's look at him. You were pomp. All your pomp has been brought down to the grave. He thought he was the bee's knees. But what has been revealed through history, our world history, what has been revealed about Lucifer? He's a liar. But he somehow, because the Revelation teaches me, we still wander after the beast. So look at this. It says there, along with your noise of your harps, maggots are spread out beneath you and worms cover you. I mean, I just want to ask you, why that imagery?
Everything comes to an end.
Did you hear what she just said? A few weeks ago, I spoke on the living know what? That they will die. You see, what God is reminding creation of is that you are mortal. We don't think we are. And see, I want to come back to Lucifer. There's something wrong here. If you look at verse 12, how you have fallen. And dear friends, when you look at this and you start looking at the different kingdoms, look at Nebuchadnezzar. What was his downfall? Pride. I mean, keep your hand there. Jump with me to Daniel. We must look at this. I mean, I always love doing this, and I'm going to do it when I tell you this now because I really love doing it.
Nebuchadnezzar was also a bit of a psychiatric patient.
He was. Good observation. Daniel chapter 4. I want you to go there with me. The king has a dream. It's about a tree that stands tall, that has lots of birds in it, and animals collect underneath it. Daniel chapter 4. You know, dear friends, when you were reading in Isaiah we've already started with him in verse 11. We are talking about one of the kingdoms that God even acknowledges as the greatest kingdom ever. I want you to understand that. God recognized the majestic value of Babylon. It was known to be the jewel of the kingdoms. I mean, dear friends, and God even acknowledges that. How does he acknowledge it? By referring to Nebuchadnezzar as the king that was never to be measured up against, equal to. He was the head of gold. Every other kingdom that followed was inferior to Babylon. You know, and hidden in there, when God created Lucifer, he created him with saying, wow, man, look at this angel. He acknowledged him. You know, and one of the frightening things is when you think that God endowed him with this brilliance that he had, but it went to his head. Happened to Nebuchadnezzar.
I was just going to say, on that point you just made about Babylon regarded as a threat by God, it's interesting that on Tuesday that question was asked.
Ask it.
14:12. How could Isaiah apply 14:12 to 14 to the king of Babylon? Because you would have thought normally that Assyria would have been recognized as the most dangerous enemy. And in fact, what Isaiah was doing was looking further down in time to see what Babylon was eventually going to become.
Thank you. So, you see what you've just done now, Ethel, and thank you for that. When we read present time, Isaiah, present time, we are actually also looking futuristic. But you see, we get caught up with present, but it's a whole lot of things happening. And it's, you know, the interesting thing is, if only we could learn from history, we would know how we're handling present time. You see, what can I ask you, what was the king of Babylon doing when they fell? They were having a party. You know, when you look around us, this world is falling, but what's everybody doing? Having a party. I want you to understand, when I look around me, you know, people that are pompous. You know, one man, when we were having a serious drought, I'm talking now easily nearly 30 years ago, where we were having a bad drought in South Africa. And there's a whole lot of bank owners that got together. Bank owners, okay, not working for banks. Bank owners were getting together, and they were actually discussing, dear friends, the smart card. The microchip that you're talking about, 30 years ago they started working on that already. We think it just happened overnight. I have a friend who was actually part of in the development of the microchip, which has become a common thing to us. I remember looking at his board that he had cut out of an ATM. I looked at it and I said, what? Okay, didn't have F&B and things like that. F&B wasn't really in existence at that time. It was something else. But anyway, you looked at it and I said, what's that? He said, you're going to draw money from it. What? 30 years ago. When we look at what's happening here, there's a word used here called the day of the Lord. I'm going to come to that just now. But I want you to see something. When we're talking about Babylon, they were so sure of themselves. I mean, they built farms on the inside of Babylon, that if they were sieged, we had no problem. But there was a weak point that they didn't know about. What was the weak point? The river Euphrates. All the king of Medo-Persia did is he diverted the river Euphrates, and all of a sudden the water that they needed to run Babylon fell. But the interesting thing, that's how they got access to Babylon. But I don't want to get there. I want you to look at what happens in Daniel chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar, this great king. I mean, God refers to him as his servant. I mean, he had, you see, the morning star was God's servant. And we somehow forget that we are servants and we become kings. No, you're always servants. He's going to say to you, well done, good and faithful servant. Never forget, you are by creation a servant. You can never be a God. You can have the roles of gods, where you have other people under you, which you are subject to looking after, but you are never God, because God is unique in this one sense. What is his uniqueness? He creates. We don't create. He creates out of nothing. We create out of something. How great are we? I mean, it's like when God turned the river Nile into blood. The Egyptians did it too. Huh? They turned water into blood.
How did they do that?
How incredible. It would have really been something godly if they turned the blood into water.
How did they do that?
I'm not going to get there now. Daniel chapter 4. Good question, not to answer now. Daniel chapter 4. I want you to look at something. He's warned. Dear friends, he is warned. Did you hear me? Daniel chapter 4. I just want you to know the whole of Daniel chapter 4 is God warning somebody who's pompous. Pride always precedes.
Pride before the fall.
So what's it mean? When you see a person walking around like this, what's the next thing you're going to see them doing? Pride always precedes a fall. Somehow we don't think so. Nah, it's not going to happen. No, it's going to happen. So many stories. Here we see, look at this. God tells him, Daniel loves Nebuchadnezzar. I want to tell you, dear friends, I'm looking forward to seeing Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar in heaven.
You never get into heaven.
Without a doubt. And the most beautiful thing about it is Daniel's going to walk up to him and put his arms around him and say, "Oh King, thank you so much for finally bending your knee." If only we could get people to do it. But listen to this. He says, to the king, "Oh, if only this dream was for somebody, else, your enemies." Let me just show you. Jump with me to Daniel chapter 4, and I want you to look at 19, but towards the bottom, not 20 yet. Belshazzar answered, that's Daniel, "My Lord, if only the dream had applied to your enemies. If only it was for them. And its meaning to your adversaries." You could hear that he was saying to the king, God has spoken against you, if only it was for your enemies, but he's spoken against you. Now, then I want you to notice. Let's come down to the other part, and I want you to jump to verse 27, I think it is. Let me just look. Yes, 27. "Therefore, O king, be pleased." Listen to Daniel's request. Dear friends, I want you to understand, as I was looking at it. Pardon?
Do the end of 26 as well.
Okay, let's do the end of 26. I always like it when Paul tells it. "The command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored." Wow, thank you, Paul. "To you when you acknowledge that heaven rules." Dear friends, isn't that brilliant? God's not going to take your kingdom away. He'll give it back to you when you finally wake up and realize that God rules. I love that. Thank you, Paul. But then it says, "Therefore, king, be pleased to accept my advice." Can you imagine him pleading? "Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue." But listen to what the story says. Verse 29, "All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar." Does it say maybe? All this happened. Do you believe that? 12 months later. A year later, dear friends. A year later. He's standing, walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. Now, dear friends, none of us in our wildest dreams can know what that was like, because you see, part of prophecy was that Babylon will become a deserted place. There is nothing to look back on and say, wow, what was it like? Because God wanted to remove an obstacle or something that people would think. He's walking on his palace. And dear friends, I look at Nebuchadnezzar. I have a great admiration for Nebuchadnezzar. He was an incredible king. Really, from kings of kings, he was. If I wanted to be anybody else, I would have liked to be under Nebuchadnezzar's rule. Because while you were under his rule, I mean, God actually tells them, when you go to Babylon, pray for the prosperity of the king, because you will then prosper. The letter sent to the exiles in Babylon was, build your houses, establish yourselves. It was a good kingdom to be under. But then I want you to notice, 12 months later, he's walking on the roof of his palace, and then verse 30, he said. Now, dear friends, there's a reason why I'm emphasizing he said. Why do I want to emphasize the fact that he said it? He didn't think it, he said it. Why that? Why is it so important that we all suddenly hear the words? Why is this brought out that he said it? Pardon?
His defiance, that he actually declared it.
That's one of the things we can look at.
Was boasting.
Pardon?
Was boasting.
True, but what was... Yes, Gerald?
One of the problems is you can't always stop evil thoughts into your mind, but stop putting it into action. And the minute he said it, he put these thoughts into action.
Dear yes?
In Afrikaans, they say, when die hart van vol is, moet die mond van oor.
You know the most incredible thing about sin? It can be captivated here. But once it comes out here, no longer captivated. You know, once the word leaves your mouth, it's finished. You know, I mean, Christ even says that if you look at a woman with lust, you've already done it. But you know that that's where it starts. If if Eve was just looking at the tree and wondering about it, it would have been great. But it didn't stop there. She got into a conversation. Now, I can imagine Nebuchadnezzar walking on his roof, talking to himself. Do any of you talk to yourself and say how great you are? You know, that's what all these books do. They say, look at the mirror. You are good. You are really needed. And then your wife walks in and says, that's a bad mirror. Do you understand that Nebuchadnezzar was walking and talking what his heart was full of? And what was the next words that came out of his mouth? Paul, moo. That's the next words that came out of his mouth. Because the word says to me, he became an animal. Now, dear friends, you know, when I look at this, I kind of wonder, what does it mean to be an animal? Come on, Paul. What's it mean to be an animal? What did you say? They don't have choice. Don't have choice. God had granted Nebuchadnezzar choice up to that point. He misused his choice. Now you're going to be an animal. Now the most amazing thing, we think that this is God's wrath against Nebuchadnezzar, but what's the most amazing thing? For 7 years, God looked after Nebuchadnezzar. Because he was an animal. And God looks after the animals of the field. He wanted Nebuchadnezzar to know, I will still look after you, even when your brain is stupid. I will pour my rain out on you, even though you are wicked. I still love you, but I want you to come to your senses. And for 7 years, he ate grass like an animal. For 7 years, he was under God's control. You know, dear friends, many times I think to myself, any kingdom who had a knowledge of Nebuchadnezzar's demise could have walked in and taken over the vacuum space that was left there because the king was eating grass. Why did no other kingdom step in there? Because it was still God's kingdom. And Daniel, his good servant, was keeping a check on everybody. Even checked upon Nebuchadnezzar. Obviously walked down to the field. Hey Nebuchadnezzar, how are things going with you today? Your hair is really starting to look like feathers. That's what God's word said. Man, your nails like claws. I can see what God said is really happening. It's amazing. But what was he hoping for? What was he praying for? Did the prophecy end? The prophecy said, after 7 years you will come to your senses. Every year, as it ticked by, I can imagine Daniel, you're 1 gone, 6 more left, 6 gone, 1 more left. Days down, finally D-Day, he must have walked down to the thing, looked at Nebuchadnezzar and wondered, watched what was going to happen. Listen to what happens. It says there in verse 34, at the end of the time which was decreed, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. You see, dear friends, what I want you to understand from this whole lesson is that we are all wanting to be kings. You see, because that's what it's like to be like God. Did you know that? God is a king, and he made you to be like him. So it's not uncommon for you to think that you're royalty. You are. But Lucifer didn't realize it, that he was really an incredible king. He had all the angels subject to him. He was, now I want you to go back to Isaiah, and we're going to finish off now. And I know that there's so much more, but I wanted to make sure that when you walked out of here, you knew that your kingdom can be a great kingdom. And God wants you to be a king, but he also wants you to be a priest. Okay, I want you to look here. We see there in Isaiah chapter 14. I want you to notice how you have fallen from heaven. The origin of Lucifer from heaven. That's verse 12. How you have fallen from heaven. Oh, what? Paul, what does yours say?
Morning star.
Oh, morning star. Please explain that to me. Morning star. Come on.
Isn't that Venus?
I think it's in the Hebrew, but it actually interprets as day star, son of God, Lucifer.
Thank you. Lucifer again is actually the word brought in when they were.
Now, the lesson summary of that actually explains that.
Yes, I just forget now. But the word Lucifer means morning star. It's French, is it?
Lucifer is Latin.
Latin, I mean.
It means light bearer.
Light bearer.
The Hebrew doesn't actually connect.
No, it doesn't. But what I want to say about that, morning star, explain.
The bright star.
Explain.
It starts the day. It comes out just before dawn.
But how do you know that? Where do you get that from?
I'll meet you tomorrow morning.
Isn't that Venus?
Do you see? And at night, can any of us tell what the morning star is?
Venus.
Venus.
Doesn't that have something to do with it?
Nothing to do with it. But I want you to understand, we're learning something from Venus. What are we learning from Venus? Is it a star?
No, it's a planet.
Pardon?
Reflecting the sun's light.
it's reflecting, it's the first one to reflect the light as it's about to rise, and it's the last one to reflect the light as it goes down. You see, Lucifer was the first one to actually see the light of God, and then he would go out and he would tell all the others. That's how brilliant he was. God made him like that. Ethel? Was it? Okay, but I want you to see something here. That God recognized Lucifer, like he recognized all these kings. You know what I picked up as I was reading through all of this? God recognized each one. He knew their names. He knew their problems. He was wrestling with the kings. You know, dear friends, I want you to understand, he's wrestling with you and your kingdom. Wants you badly. Now, I want you to just end off. I asked the question right in the beginning. Why do we have such strong wording coming out of the chapters that we read, how God's going to deal with his enemies? I mean, there we have it, they can be like worms. Worms are going to be, when we see this kind of aggressiveness of God, and we need to answer this question. Paul? Yes, I thought you went like this with your hand. If I was an auctioneer, sold.
I'll just share what I was thinking.
Share it, because that's what I want.
Forgive me because it's not actually part of your. It's just we get a little lost by looking at Isaiah 14 up to verse 11, and then suddenly we all switch into Lucifer mode and say it's all about Lucifer, but it's all about the king of Babylon. It's not about Lucifer. There's no Lucifer in the Bible.
Yes, link to that.
It's an interesting point that Paul raises, but if you look at the spirit of prophecy, you pick it up from Isaiah 14, verse 4, where a proverb is said to the king of Babylon. Ellen White identifies that as Satan. She says in great controversies that he represents Satan, king of Babylon.
Well, this is something, and I'm glad that you all brought this together. We weren't just looking at kingdoms. Somebody was behind the kingdom all the time. Okay. And please, dear friends, don't forget that God has a kingdom. Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. But he has a kingdom. Timothy.
Yeah, for me, how I understood Isaiah as saying is talking about Nebuchadnezzar, and then he compares or he puts Nebuchadnezzar and Lucifer and says, so this is how also Lucifer fell. He had pride and all that, and this is exactly what you are doing. So he's sort of comparing.
Revealing to us.
Yes.
Correct, Timothy. So I want you just to, let's put it this way. Before we isolate ourselves from this, can you learn something from this for yourself? Dear friends, you are all kings. In actual fact, the Bible teaches me what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, who is the King, that you should be called the children of God. And what does that make you? Princes and princesses. Royalty. But we should behave like the King of the universe, not like Lucifer. There's a danger. You can't behave like Lucifer. That's what pride does. That's what wealth does. That's what position does. That's what power does. It can make your head so dizzy that you can spin and fall. Praise God for this, and I want you to understand. So just finish. You didn't answer this question. Why did God, or why do we find this kind of aggressive language which almost sounds hateful?
You know, whenever I read those verses which can be quite troubling, there's an interesting verse again in the Apostle Paul talks about. It says, therefore judge nothing before the time, until the coming of our Lord, and make all things of darkness light.
That's a good answer, but I'm asking you why still. I want to know why, because there is an answer.
I think one of those countries is righteousness. King Aisha seen this is what you see that throughout the Bible where love is to shout. So you can't then give you can't then fault love for shouting.
Well, I like your use there. Have any of you ever thought about love shouting? But I like that. Sometimes love is to shout because we're not paying attention to it. But what I want to link with what you've said, Timothy, so let's finish off. God hates sin. He hates it, dear friends, with a passion. If only we could hate sin also like that. But why is it that we can't hate sin like that? We don't see it. We don't see the problem that sin has caused the universe. I mean, when your children's doing something and you know it's going to hurt them, do you just stand back and say, well, it's all right? Or do you jump in boots and all to try and save your child? That's what God's doing here. I want to tell you, sometimes we use the most aggressive language with our children. You do that again and I'm going to take you out. Not outside. Why do we speak like that? Thank you. You've just put it, you just said, love is displayed so powerfully in God's aggressiveness. This aggressiveness of God is actually a revelation of His love. If He didn't care for you, oh, well, go and burn, it's all right. He doesn't want you to burn. That's why He's so adamant. And the problem is we don't see it. So when you see somebody behaving like that, you think, oh, he doesn't like me. But you don't see what they have seen. I mean, if only we could see or experience. I want to put it this way. If you had been there in the Second World War, in the Holocaust, man, your life will be different. Because you've seen it. God has seen what rebellion has done. It's attacked His kingdom. He's not going to sit back, first of all, and let it be passive. And secondly, He's going to fight for every one of you as aggressively as possible to get you. Because his foe is a roaring lion. But He's going to walk in and be the lion defeater. The lion of the tribe of Judah is going to step up to this other lion and just say, let's see who's the lion. I love that.